So yes, we have 50 employees in the Center for Teaching and Learning at UT Austin, but we also are the unit that collects all the end of semester course instructor survey forms and scans them, 250,000 every semester, and we also have a technology unit. So we do a lot of things that CTLs often don't have in their bailiwick. Our instructional development unit is about 7 folks. So yes, I have been doing team-based learning since 1998 when I first ran into Larry Michelson, and my master's in group dynamics, so I was very interested in the effects that I saw team-based learning having on communication in groups. And I've been doing instructional development since '95, and once I saw team-based learning, it became my drug of choice in terms of helping faculty create the kinds of learning experiences they want their students to have in the classroom. I know we have quite a few people from the health science education medical school here today. The health science professions, education, medical, nursing, pharmacy, those are the fields in which team-based learning has actually made the most inroads as a result of a grant that folks got in 2000 to disseminate team-based learning across medical schools as a result of accreditation pressures to have more active learning in the classroom. Team-based learning was actually born in the classroom of a management instructor. Larry Michelson teaches management, and he started to develop it when his classes went from 20 to 120 in one semester, and he always felt very strongly about the value of having students work with real cases in groups, trying to make decisions as close as possible to the real kinds of decisions they would make in their profession. So he cobbled this together over a few years, quite a few years actually. It was the early 80s he started working on this. And then in 2000, Boyd Richards from the Baylor College of Medicine got the grant to disseminate it into medical schools. And so for about 4 years, folks from medical schools, faculty members from medical schools, were actually paid to play with TBL in their classrooms, and then they'd come back together every year, once a year, and compare notes. How did it work for you? What did you try? What worked? What didn't work? What are you going to try next? They went back out, did some more learning, came back. They started having this thing they started calling an annual conference, and at the end of that grant, they realized, we really want to keep doing this. This is valuable enough to us. We're seeing change in our classroom that we love, and so let's keep doing this. So they formed a nonprofit corporation called the Team-Based Learning Collaborative, and it has since gone interdisciplinary, got 800 members around the world. We've got a listserv, that kind of thing. We've got the annual conference, and we're just now really starting to stand up a real formal scholarship track at that conference where people are actually trying to do research on the effects of team-based learning. So that's the history of team-based learning and my experience with it. Couple of things about my relationship to team-based learning. I'm not a fundamentalist, so I truly believe that every teacher has to make any teaching strategy their own. So though I may have some really specific detailed answers to questions that you ask, it's only because we've thought about this a lot. And I don't want you to take that level of detail to indicate that there's just one way you can do team-based learning right, and if you deviate from that, then you're a heretic or something like that. Not at all, not at all. Every teacher's got to make it their own. No two teachers can teach alike or even should try, because we all have different strengths, we all have different angles on life, and we should leverage those instead of trying to squash them. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that because we're going to have experiences with pieces of team-based learning that are somewhat detailed, that can also give you the message that you have to kind of throw out everything you've been using before and start fresh with this brand new thing called team-based learning. And that's not true either. Team-based learning I think of as a motivational exoskeleton that you can hang around a lot of what you're already using. So if you have assignments that you really like, videos, other materials that you really like, that you think teachers or students get a lot from, you can certainly work those in. So those are two things that I want to say about how I think team-based learning works best. So we are going to learn team-based learning by doing some of it. at first, put on our student hats, have a team-based learning experience, and then we'll debrief that afterwards. So let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 23. So let us have 5 teams. Okay. So I'm going to ask you all to play along with me while we organize our teams. So the first thing I want to ask is, there was a pre-reading that was sent out, and I know that life being life, some folks didn't get it, some folks got it and didn't get around to it, some folks probably got it and printed it out and read it. That's okay. That whole span is actually okay, because what that does is that creates in this room today with us a pretty similar situation to what you're going to have in the classroom, right? You're going to have some students who got the reading, some students who were distracted, couldn't do it. That's fine. So, so it's actually better if some folks didn't get it or read it. But if some folks did, let me ask, did some folks receive it? Yes. Okay, good. Good. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what we're going to do, we're going to form teams by grabbing our stuff, standing up, and forming a line. And we're going to start here, and we're going to kind of go around like that. So on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is, I got it, I printed it, I read it maybe once or twice, highlighted it, took some notes, that's a 10. And a 1 is, man, there was a pre-reading. That would have been good to know. Okay, so if you consider yourself like a 5 or above, not a 10, a 5 or above, what I'd like you to do is grab your stuff, stand up, 5 or above, having read the materials. Okay, and start a line right here. Okay, so we need yes, yes. Okay, so we need 5 of those, 5 of those, 5 of those in each folder.
And then we're going to put the folders on the desk.
Then I'll hand the folders out. Wow. Okay, this is good. All right. Doesn't matter. Just but squish over a little bit because we're. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm not. You don't have to sort yourself. You don't have to sort yourself. No. Anybody? These are just the 5 or above people. Just 5 or above. Okay. Folks still sitting down. Are any of you in the social sciences? No, still sitting down. Yes? Yeah. Folks still sitting down. If you're in the social sciences, stand up and come and add on to the end of this line. Anybody else still sitting down, taught with team-based learning before, or been to a team-based learning workshop? Now, you're already getting in line. All right, if you've taught with team-based learning before, or been to a team-based learning workshop, stand up, come add on to the end of the line.
With all my stuff?
With all your stuff.
What if that's true for someone else?
That's all right. That's all right. Yep. And the folks still sitting down, if you've taught with case studies. Anybody taught with case studies? Yeah? Up, end of the line. And actually, that's a small enough number. Let's just get everybody up onto the end of the line. Does everybody?
With all our stuff.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Okay. All right, fantastic. So.
Sorry, they were the ones that.
All right, so we're going to have 5 teams. So what I want you to do is I want you to start counting off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ready?
1, 2, 3, 4,
5.
5,
4.
3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
5,
4.
3.
What's the question?
You're 1. Just say 1. Okay. And so you're also 1. And 2, 3. Okay, fantastic. So let's have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Back there. All right, we only need 5 of these because yeah. Are we good? Oh, perfect. Look at that. This crack team. All right.
dokey, artichoke. These are extras.
Yep. That was ready for 42 folks. Fantastic. Well done indeed. Perfect timing. All right. So, there you go. Team 1. Team 2. Team
That's what I do.
3.
Yeah.
4. 5.
Right, it was actually here.
Oh, it was?
After this.
Oh. Oh no, they've had it this whole time. I need one. All right, please introduce yourselves if you don't know each other.
That's unfair.
You sure 3 can't be over here? We'll see a lot better.
Yeah, if you want to move, go ahead. All right, so let's get started. So in your folders, your team folders, we're going to have those all morning. In your team folders, you will see something that says TBL 101, Readiness Assurance Test. This is a very simple multiple choice test. And so what I'd like you to do is play along with me as a student. And we're going to take this test first as individuals, by ourselves, closed book. And then when everyone's done as an individual, we will then move on to the next step. So play along with me. Do your best. Don't get hung up on this. The whole point is to observe our experience. So let's go ahead and do that now. There should be... All right, looks like most everybody's close on done. So now what I'd like you to do, has anybody not seen one of these? These are super cool. These are like a combination between a Scantron form and a lotto card. So I'm not kidding. There's a star underneath the right answer, and you scratch off the stuff to see if where you think the answer is where the star is. And so here's an extra little fun piece for teams. Each of these questions is worth 3 points. So if you get the star on the first scratch, then your team gets 3 points. If it takes you 2 scratches, you get 2 points. Third scratch, 1 point. Does that make sense? Coolness. All right. So here's where you try to come to consensus on your team answers. And when your team is done, go ahead and bring your card up to me. All right, let's reconvene, everybody. Let's reconvene as teachers now. We're going to take off our student hat. What a jerk. All right.
The question was, did you miss one question badly or 2 slightly?
However, okay, now that's a great point. Okay, so we're going to debrief everything. But even that little interaction is valuable because this team, if next time around, they may feel like, oh man, we don't want to have that happen again, right? That jerk in the front row is like, we got to sneak into his room and turn his alarm off so he misses the test or something like that.
Actually, the point I was trying to make is that you failed in distributing characteristics across teams.
Oh, nice. It's on me now. Okay.
Is it always the professor's fault?
It always is, right? Actually, that's another good point. I'm going to come back to that. Before we come back to that, remind me. Let's rewind and let's just talk about everything that happened when I said, okay, I want you to grab your stuff and stand up and we're going to form this ridiculous line. So what was that about? What was I trying to do there? Diversify the groups. Okay, and so do you remember the criteria that I used one after the other?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you felt kind of confident in your reading, if you taught with TBL before, if you're in the social sciences, because we're going to do an application activity that involves social sciences. So what I did is I tried to figure out, for this, I mean, we're calling this a class, right? For this class, what criteria among the students would make it easier or more difficult for you all to do well as teams? And I made sure to distribute those as well as I could across teams. The way that I did it just now is good up to class sizes of about 50. After that, it gets kind of ridiculous. So what folks do in classes of 50 or more is they'll have maybe they'll have those questions on a kind of little survey that they have students fill out on the first day. Then they go home and form the teams themselves and then email students what team they're on and tell them where to sit in the class and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
So you're recommending, I teach classes for about 200, 220, and one of the biggest challenges for me is how do I split these students, especially considering that I get freshmen straight out of high school.
Right.
And putting them in groups is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you recommend, that we give them a sheet on the first day of class to fill out?
Mm-hmm. So,
Would it be better to do it online?
yeah, there's a fellow at UT. We're gonna close the morning session with a video of folks at UT who use this, and he teaches 345 students. And what he does is he and I have worked together to create. We use Blackboard as our LMS there. I don't know. Is your Blackboard okay?
Well, technically we're using Moodle now, but we're going to Blackboard in the fall.
Oh, okay, okay. Anyway, I mean, an online survey. We use Blackboard. We took an instrument that is the Big Five inventory is a personality inventory that did a factor analysis of a ton of personality inventories, including Myers-Briggs and all of that. And they came up with 5 personality characteristics. This was all his idea, that he wanted to distribute across groups. Those are the criteria he wanted to distribute. So he has his students, as they enroll, he has his TA. He's only got a TA. 345 students, he's got one TA 10 hours a week. So before class starts, he has the email, the TA email the students as they enroll, say, go take this survey. I want to form teams that will help you succeed as best I can. So it's a little self-interest thing for the student to actually go do it. And then he uses those results to form the teams. And he actually doesn't have students get into teams until the second week to try and accommodate some of that churn of students adding, students dropping, that kind of thing. But we've got this kind of slick system where they take the survey, we download it from Blackboard, do some sorting in Excel, and then it cranks out the teams. You'll see how he actually gets them to sit together in the video. But it's possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would be very interested in that.
Yeah, great question. Other questions, sir?
How about using the class roster?
What about it?
Just using your class roster as put in groups. Clump them.
Clump them. Yeah, randomly. Randomly is almost as good as doing it strategically. I mean, the literature shows doing it strategically has a slight advantage. Randomly is almost as good. What you really don't want to do is let your students form their own teams, though. Yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things happen. One, friends will find each other, so you have like 2 folks in a group, and then other people kind of cluster on. So there's a voting block in that group, for lack of a better word, and there's an insider-outsider dynamic that prevents the group from really gelling as its own social entity. So you get that. You also get the leftovers, right? The folks at the end who are like, well, nobody wanted me. Yeah, nobody wanted me either, so I guess we're a team, right? That's like a super demotivating way to start an experience in a course, being rejected by your peers. So those are 2 reasons that you want to avoid students pairing up in their own teams. Yeah?
We teach a pedagogy course, and one of the students brought up a very important thing about team-based learning. We were discussing why it's a bad idea to let students form teams themselves, and she brought up the fact that it's kind of like asking somebody on an interview, can you be my friend? So there's a little bit of that as far as the students are concerned. They don't want to step out of their comfort zone and ask somebody, hey, can you be my friend? Can I be on your team?
Right.
And especially with freshmen, that is an issue. They don't know each other.
Right. And They probably won't choose people different from themselves, which they really need to, especially freshmen. And also with teacher form teams, if you do it with the survey or you do it with a line or whatever, they don't have a choice, so they just, do it. But it's also transparent. They also see there's no like crazy puppet mastering going on here. You can be upfront about it, saying, I chose these teams to do my best at helping you succeed as a group. And I did it with these criteria. Yeah.
I only did this with 65 students.
Uh-huh.
But I like the idea of lining them up around the room because they understood immediately what my criteria were. I teach an introductory environmental science course of non-science people.
Aha.
So first I asked the scientists and engineers to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
Then I said the bunny people. Then I said the art people.
The money people?
The money
Oh, I thought you said the bunny people. Wow, I got to go to this school. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay.
The money people,
Uh-huh.
the accountants, the finance.
Economist, business, yeah.
Exactly, and then the art people and so on.
Cool.
And it was very transparent, and they all said, oh yeah, we understand that. You're trying to mix everybody and get a mix of people on a team.
So somebody asked, well, what happens if I'm already standing up and this new criteria applies to me too? And I said, doesn't matter. And the fact is that what you have to do is you have to figure out what's the most important criteria to sort by first. So that's just some playing you can do in your own head. Sir?
Is there an optimum number of TBL sessions per week to do?
Well, it depends on what you mean by TBL sessions. What we just did is team formation and what's called the readiness assurance process, which is something that you do at the beginning of each unit. What some teachers, when they're new to TBL, can do is say, wow, this is awesome. Look at the energy that was uncorked in the team test. I'm going to do that every class. And so it just becomes this death march for the students of testing. So this is only one of a couple of different ways you can have students work in groups, not all of which need to be graded. So this is something that should happen at least about 5 or 6 times a semester. Are you in semesters or quarters? Semesters, 5 or 6 times a semester. But it's definitely a good idea to have them doing other group stuff as well. And we'll play with some of that stuff later this morning. Yeah. Good question. Other questions? These are great. Oh, yeah.
What about the duration of a TBL session? What do you think of that?
So how long a TBL session lasts?
Would be an effective timeline, because it cannot be too long, otherwise students are interfering.
Right. So it can't be too long, otherwise students get bored, that kind of thing. It depends, a lot of course depends upon just what the gods in the registrar office say your class time is. Okay, I got an hour and 15 minutes, I guess it's going to be an hour and 15 minutes. Shorter than 45 minutes is really hard to do, just because of the time it takes to answer a multiple choice question and then talk about it in a substantive way, and then debrief it, that kind of thing. What some folks will do, some folks have classes that meet once a week for 3 hours or something like that. They'll have one of these at the beginning of that session that takes maybe an hour, hour and 15 minutes. Then they'll have a break, and then they'll get on to the next thing. You'll notice some people have rules of thumb. I said, okay, first team's done, the rest of the teams have 5 minutes. That's a way to keep the tempo tight and keep students, do your best to keep students who finish first from feeling like now I'm wasting my time. And then if they waste their time, they can get restless, disengaged, that kind of thing. Other folks have, when half the teams are done, the rest of the teams have 5 minutes. It's kind of up to you. There's a lot of points along TBL where you just got to kind of play with what feels right to your class, your students, your discipline, your teaching style. Yeah.
So my question is that, would there be a fixed number of groups for one instructor? Is there something that one instructor can deal with 15 group or 10 group, and how many students should comfortably be in one team?
So good question. How many students should there's 2 questions there. How many students per team and how many teams per instructor? Yes. So the team-based learning community recommends a slightly larger group than the cooperative learning community. Cooperative learning folks always say 4 is a good number. In TBL, we say 5 to 7 for a couple of reasons. One, we want to make sure that each team, that we do our best to make sure each team has the intellectual resources to do well as a team. And 2, TBL works really well in large classes, but in large classes, attendance can be kind of hit and miss, right? And so if you have a team of 4 and 2 people are gone, then you're down to 2, which is kind of barely a team. If you have a team of 6 and 2 are gone, you have 4. Larger than 7 and things start to get unwieldy. It gets more difficult for the team to gel as a unit. So 5 to 7 is what we recommend. Yeah, good question. Oh, yeah, number of groups to the instructor. Well, you know, I got that fellow in business who's got the TA, one TA 10 hours a week, and he teaches 350 students, so he's got 55 groups of 7. And
So this is what my next question is, that we get the team result and then we see the feedback. We know that different teams have different questions, they have weak in different area. Now, the instructor role is to present the material in a way that it covers all the questions or all the challenges a particular team has. So would it be a presentation and instructor is going to the whole group, or it goes individually to each group and presents their specific issues?
so did everybody understand that question? Did you get that question? That teams are going to, for the most part, have differences around what they understood and didn't understand. And so what do we do next?
Yeah.
Right? So there's a step in between what you all experienced and then what the teacher would do for a whole class that we didn't do today, but Team 2 would probably really want to do, right? And that is appeal. So we formed teams, and then we sat down and we did the readiness assurance process, which is the individual quiz and then the team quiz with immediate feedback. There's a third part to that we didn't do, and that is if you as a team feel like you thought about it as individuals, you talked about it pretty well as students, as a group, you made some good decisions, and by God, we can still make an argument for the answer we chose. At that point, before the teacher does any lecturing or anything like that, if you've given me your little scratch-off card, so I've collected your individual quizzes before I gave you the scratch-off card, then I gave you the scratch-off card, you did your team quizzing, you gave it back to me. So now I've got individual accountability and I've got group accountability. That's all on the teacher's desk. At that point, the groups can pull out their books and write an appeal saying, you know, on question 5, we feel like C could also be a correct answer because on page 357 it says this, an argument supported by evidence. Okay, so those need to be written and those need to come only from teams, not individuals. And those need to be carried away out of the classroom and dealt with later by email or something like that. The one time I've seen team-based learning burn to the ground, it was a teacher who, there was a couple of things involved. She wasn't as ready to step out of the spotlight as she thought she was. Because in team-based learning, like, what was I doing? I was just kind of wandering around listening. You guys were engaging. And in team-based learning, that's really the juicy stuff. But what she did that broke the back of the class was she tried to handle appeals right there and then, after the students had thought about it, made intellectual commitments, talked about it, made group decisions, and then been told, no, you're wrong. And at that point, like, their blood is up and they're unionized. So they just won't take no for an answer. So appeals really need to be handled outside of class. And sometimes, you know, you write a bad question and the students can say, like, this is just not like, it was unclear whether this or that. Like, oh, yeah, fair enough, you're right. I'll give you credit for that. So, I'll answer your question quickly and we'll get back to it. But once I, as a teacher, have gotten back all your scratch cards, I can say, you know what? Questions 1 through 5, just about every team got right. That material's been covered. Doesn't have to come out of my mouth. The students either got it from the reading or they taught it to each other. So questions 7 through 10, those are pretty hit and miss. So I better do sort of an explanatory lecture about that material.
You're doing it on an average class answer.
Yeah.
Just like we can do with iClicker, we can see the percentage and the average class doesn't know this answer, right? So we
Right.
emphasize that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's the best we can do.
All right. That was going to be my question to you. Do I have to, use a Scantron? Can I use a Scantron instead of that scratch-off card?
Well, the scratch-off card, the Scantron you can use for the individual test, for sure. With class sizes like yours, you may want to go that route. The scratch-off card, though, has some real magic built into it. Team-based learning was around for a decade or more before these came along, but when these came along, they added a whole new level of turbo to it because of this effect. If we're on a team and I'm really socially dominant and you're kind of quiet, and on the first question, on the first test, I think the answer's A and you think the answer's B, I'm probably going to bully my answer onto the team test. I'll talk over you, or I'll charm, or whatever. We don't know each other yet, so I will probably bully my answer onto the team test. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It's not A. Oh, well, you said it was B. Let's try B. Scratch, scratch. It is B. Whoa. So in that moment, the team learns that it had the right answer. The right answer did reside within the team. But it was only because of the way that we communicated with one another that we lost points. And so next time around, I may be more motivated to pursue your opinion. You're going to be more motivated to assert it. And our team members are going to be more motivated to make sure the best thinking actually gets discussed. Before these things came along, that moment only happened one time per test. They'd fill out the whole test, turn it in, and then you'd put the answers up. But with these, that feedback loop happens one time per scratch. So it's not even just one time per question. It's one time per attempt. And so that feedback cycle happens, maybe 15 times using one of these instead of just once. And that's what really glues teams together really fast.
So wrong answer is actually good for TBL.
Well, yeah, I mean, it can be. Well, it's really good for TBL teachers because if you only teach to individuals and you don't teach with teams, like when a student takes a test and gets a question wrong, they're mad at you, the teacher. Like, ah! But when they get the wrong answer, but then like everyone else on their team got it right, it deflates that. So that's nice. I mean, that's nice. And then another nice thing about TBL is when we were students, we would take the little tests and we'd go up and we'd turn them in, and then often we would hang out in the hallway and wait for our friends, right? Go, number 4, what was up with number 4? What'd you put? I don't know. You'd have that digestion conversation with your friends, and this just moves that conversation into the room and gives it feedback on what the right answer actually was. So it captures that social energy. Yeah?
We had a situation a couple weeks ago where we did the IRAT with our students. We collected their IRAT, it was graded, and then we had them take the TRAT or the GRAT. And a student came up and said, "Can I see my answers to the IRAT because I don't remember what I put?"
Right.
Is there an advantage or a disadvantage to having their answers in front of them when they engage in the group process?
So I believe there is an advantage to it because they can just review, they can have that in front of them. What I usually do, I don't do it here because I'm not collecting your stuff and grading it, is I'll have a quiz form and then I'll have an individual answer sheet. They keep the quiz form, and I encourage them to circle what answers they put. They come up and turn in their individual answer sheet. And then they have to turn the quiz form in as they go out the door. Yeah.
I did a kind of an alternative to that. They had clickers. And so they would do the individual test, and then I just flashed them up on the PowerPoint, and they'd all click their way through the answers, and then they had their individual sheets still, and I had a legal set of answers.
Right. There's a teacher at UT that does that too. Yeah.
Well, just getting back to what Nancy was talking about, because we're in the same class. I'm friends with Karen Kirkham at Wright State. She works with Paul Coles.
Oh, okay.
So I was asking her about it, because my first response when the student asked for their answer sheet is, you just went through this whole time of answering these questions, and you had to be sure about the ones that were easy, and if you really had to struggle with something, wouldn't you? It was 7 or 8
It's kind of
questions,
surprising, isn't it?
Yeah. So she said that in her experience, that those students are sometimes those who are, I don't know exactly what their test-taking issues are and what their psychological issues are, but they're not they're not focused test takers, basically. And so I'm wondering if you've had a similar experience, or you just always let them keep their answers anyway, so you haven't had the request for that?
I have, well, I did have the request for that, and I just responded by doing the separate student answer sheet thing. Now, one thing some people do, which I actually really like, and we didn't do today for time's sake, is on the individual answer sheet, they will allow students to split their vote. So just like you had partial credit on the scratch-off card, right, 3, 2, 1, some folks, their individual answer sheet will be a grid of, that looks kind of like this. It's, you know, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3. But in the boxes, students can write a 3 if they are absolutely dead sure that answer is correct. 3 points per question. If they're a little bit unsure, they can put 2 under the answer that they think is right and maybe 1 somewhere else. And if they just want to throw everything up against the wall and see what sticks, they can 1, 1, 1. And what that does is it gives them a parity in their experience between the individual test and the team test, so that they do the partial credit thing on the team, individual partial credit on the team. But it also enables them to come to the table in their group conversation with basically confidence data. So like, no, I put all 3 points on this. Well, I was actually between B and C. And I mean, I've done my dissertation I did on team-based learning. I've done a bunch of research. And I have, I did this one study that was pretty interesting. Fortunately, I have audio data for 2 teams, one of which got better working together over the course of the semester and one which actually got worse working together over the course of the semester. And what analyzing the transcript shows is the team that got better did a couple of things more frequently. One is when it came time for them to take the team test, they, like three times or 4 times more often, would report their individual answers by hedging. They would say, well, I was between B and C, instead of just, I put B. So they had just discovered, and we weren't even using those split your vote individual answer sheets. They just figured out that helped the conversation go better, that they opened up the conversation already with room to move. And then another thing they did more frequently was they tabled questions for later. Like if they talk, couldn't come to a decision on number 2, well, let's table this and and do the rest of them and come back to it. Because what that would do, this is my hypothesis, is if they couldn't come to a consensus on number 2, they'd do number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, and over the course of doing that, because of the immediate feedback, they were able to get a better read on who actually knew this stuff better than somebody else. And so when okay, by now I figured out that you actually did study and you didn't, so we're coming back to number 2, I'm listening to you, I'm with her this time. So, yeah.
So I've heard about folks who have teams when they turn in their group RAT, make requests of the faculty member to lecture, on certain questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever worked with faculty who have turned that around and had other teams explain to other teams?
Yeah, not at that level. What we do, what I recommend frequently is, and that's kind of a cool way to go when we do the application activities, which we'll do later on today. Often somebody who's just learned something is the very best teacher of it. If I'm a student and I have just figured out, like I've burst through this, a misconception into, I get it now. I can actually do a better job of talking to a fellow student and say, yeah, you're thinking of it this way. I thought of it that way too. You can't think of it that way. You got to think of it this way. That's fresh in their mind. They have words for that. Whereas you and I, who've thought about this stuff for decades maybe, we've forgotten that was even a possibility. And so it's just baffling to us that they don't just get it. And so that's one of the reasons why I love the team test and the application activities, is because I hear them explaining stuff to each other in language that would never occur to me, but is kind of awesome and clearly works. And so anytime you can do that, I think is a great idea. Yeah.
We did clinical technology testing quiz,
Mm-hmm.
and always worked much better. The students who got it right explaining to the students that didn't. And I think their language and their way of explaining
Mhm.
is far better than me.
Mhm.
telling them.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, they can refer to like TV shows and stuff that,
Yeah.
that help other students understand. I've never even heard of that TV show, and I probably wouldn't like it anyway. Yeah. Yeah. Ma'am.
Well, something I've done in my classrooms a lot is, in the individual test, is multiple choice with explanation. So even if they mark the right answer, if their explanation is wrong, they might get 0 credit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the explanation, you know, they're very short answers.
Mhm.
Explain why. And if they get the wrong answer, but they have a dang good explanation, they can get 75% point for that question.
That sounds grading
0,
intensive.
25, 50, 75, 100. I'm sorry?
Is that grading intensive? I mean, does it take time to?
You can't do more than 50 students
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
classroom with that, because, you know,
Right.
it is grading intensive, you have to, you know.
What a version of that I've seen that is,
But you could use that in a team base, and then they have that in front of them to argue.
aha, on the just on the individual, but not on the team. Yeah, so they bring their rationales to the table
Exactly.
in written form.
Exactly.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. A version of that I've seen that I think might scale a little better is question STEM. You know, answer A is the number is 4 because reason X. B, the number is 4 because reason Y. The number is 5 because reason X. The number is 5 because reason Y. So they actually have to choose between reasons. So that's good thinking. Stephanie?
I'm just going to plug the listserv,
Ah.
the TBL listserv on this very question, because there was a great conversation about writing higher order MCQs this week. And so folks were passing back information. In fact, I forgot to put some stuff up there about how to write creative higher order thinking skills, multiple choice questions.
No, okay. All right. So on the count of 3, I'm going to ask you to hold up the card indicating your answer. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Beep, 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 beep. Oh, snap! All right.
Yeah, they were listening to us.
Okay. So, were there any minority reports? Anybody who kind of disagreed, or was convinced, or initially disagreed, but was convinced by the group? Yes, sir.
I chose A because for me, the major of the students is important criteria. And that's my reason choosing A.
Okay. And why is the major the most important?
Because, you know, I'm again reflecting on our past, medical school.
Mhm.
You have majors in biology, psychology, religion, you know, all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
So if I'm distributing, I want to make sure that the major, you know, you don't want to have all religion major in one group and biology in other groups.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this class, this sociology class, is about many aspects of life, right? So that would be one reason. Okay, go.
I would like to address that, if I may.
Let's find out.
More than half the students were undeclared. A great number, this is an introductory course where even those who are declared aren't even really sure they're going to stay in their major. We generally don't think that that makes for a very good criteria, so we went with something else as a thing, for those reasons.
Okay, sir. Oh, no, he's got, go.
Before discussing with the group, I would have gone
With D?
D.
Ah.
On the grounds that, well, age and sex to avoid, but even though the majors are undeclared, a lot of students at some institutions, maybe not this one, still have a sense for what they're going to declare. And that they may be formally undeclared, but if they're in a STEM discipline, for example, just to get through, they have to have decided and be taking some of the prerequisites.
So then how you phrase it would be, what's your major, or perhaps
What's your intended?
Intended major. That would be interesting. Sir, and then ma'am.
I liked D because it was the longest answer. I've been told that you're an expert in MCQ writing, so we should go for that.
Right. So I dare not drink the cup in front of me. All right.
We went with the B because if you look at the content of the unit, a lot of them deal with economic stratification, racial, ethnic inequality, gender issues. That would be, we thought that where they grew up would give us the most heterogeneous groups. So you get a lot of interesting interactions on those particular kinds of issues.
So how could you get that information? How could you actually logistically go about sorting students into from where they grew up?
You could ask well, the commuters would tend to be local, you know, versus people who were maybe here. You would say, how many of you are from Miami-Dade? How many of you are from elsewhere in Florida? How many of you from the United States? How many of you are international?
Yeah, that's a great way to do it. In Texas, what some folks do is they say, if you didn't grow up in Texas or any of the immediately surrounding states, then come up here and line up, you know, wherever you are in the line by distance from Texas. So, China, Alaska, New Jersey, Michigan, you know, that kind of thing. It's a much better, much friendlier request than, okay, all you foreigners up against the wall. All right, now we know who you are. Yeah, and so this D, the anxiety about discussing the course material, I got that idea from a teacher who teaches statistics in the School of Education. So these are not, for the most part, quantitatively inclined students. Myself included. I was an English major. My bachelor's degree is in screenwriting. My master's is in group dynamics. And so, and my PhD is in educational psychology, and the program at UT where I did my PhD is a very quantitatively statistics-heavy program. So, like, I faced the dragon every semester. And I was one of those students that would rate a high level of anxiety about the course material. Now, that might be something that I would recommend gathering on a survey, private survey. You know, if you do the survey thing at the beginning and sort the teams yourselves, you can ask questions that you might not want to publicly have students self-identify around. Sir?
I'm in the sociology and anthropology department.
Awesome.
And so in doing this, the question of how do we find out, the cultural diversity in the classroom, often a question is in the pre-test information is, one, where were you born? And the other one is, what language did you first learn to speak? Because right here in Miami, we have so many different languages and peoples from all over the world. Mm-hmm. And usually those two questions and another one usually gives us enough ideas of to do this kind of thing. And so that's where I chose number B.
Right. That's cool. I've not heard that, differentiating between where you were born and what language would you first learn to speak. That's probably going to become more and more popular as we get more and more, like, locally diverse. Yeah. 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 All right. So there's not necessarily a right answer here. Sorry to disappoint you. But let's now take off our student hat and put on our teaching hat and think about not only the conversation that you had around the scenario, but then the conversation we had among teams. First of all, what I like very much about application exercises like this is it engages what is a very important educational perspective to me, which is cognitive apprenticeship. The idea being that it's our job to help our students learn to think like members of our disciplines. You know, if you think about it, I mean, the word apprentice to me always brings to mind like Charles Dickens, little kid in the blacksmith shop sweeping the ashes off the floor. But what the cognitive apprenticeship literature describes apprenticeship as being is legitimate, peripheral participation in a community of practice. So that little kid in the blacksmith shop, he's just sweeping the floor, but that floor's got to get swept, right? Somebody's got to do it. Like, that's a legitimately needed task in a blacksmith shop. So it's peripheral to like the main work of the blacksmith shop, but it's legitimate. Maybe as the kid grows up, you know, he learns how to work the hammer and tongs, and pretty soon he's forging his own stuff, creating his masterpiece to graduate from being an apprentice to being a master. So my goal with this class with y'all, I wasn't born and raised in Texas, and I remember the first time I tried my first y'all. I pulled it off. I was so proud. But my goal with y'all is to help you start thinking like team-based learning instructors, right? So what I did is I gave you a task that a team-based learning instructor is really going to have to tackle. Like, how am I going to form my students into teams? How does one go about thinking like this? How do we make these decisions? And so this is an attempt at sort of cognitive apprenticeship learning for you, and that's why application activities are recommended to be sort of case-based. They use real cases, real problems, or realistic cases, realistic problems, realistic data from your field so that you can start getting students to think like people in your discipline. Folks who have taught with TBL, there's several of you in here, right? Any lessons learned that you want to share? Yeah.
Yes, the application exercises almost killed me. It was like creating them. Morning, noon, and night, my waking hours were struggling with the administration and trying to come up with application exercises. And so I think this is a really great system, but I don't know if I can do it.
Designing application activities is by far and away the most difficult part of team-based learning. Everyone will agree. My friend Jim Sibley says it's the part of TBL that has you staring out the window the most. Because it's a creative act, you know, and it's different from how we've thought about teaching in the past, and that's why the afternoon is going to be about getting in there and grappling with this stuff. So yeah, sir.
Same experience.
Well, it's brutal. Yeah, it is. Yeah, and when somebody like really puts one together that is lovely, it's just. God, that is sexy. That is a sexy application activity because you can see what kinds of decisions it's pulling out of students' minds in order to accomplish.
Again, a plug for the listserv.
Hey.
The teambasedlearning.org, you can sign up. There is a community of practitioners out there that is huge, that is very collegial. You put out your discipline. If you can be more specific in terms of what you want the students to grapple with. Chances are there's somebody out there who's doing something or similar to give you ideas. Plus, on the website, there are tons of different ideas. And some folks have filmed the things that they've done. So it's out there. There's a larger TBL group. And here at our university, we have a community of practitioners now who meet together and share what they're doing. So there's support.
There's help out there, and it's really, really something you shouldn't try to do alone. I mean, you can try and get a start, but finding other people, even if it's completely different discipline, you can see the shape of the task. You're giving them that kind of information and asking them to make this kind of decision. You know, I could use something else in my discipline for that kind of information and that kind of, but I get it now. So yeah, teambasedlearning.org, the TBL Collaborative. We've got this resource bank where we encourage people to submit stuff that they do. Ideally, an entire module, and by module we mean instructional outcomes, reading assignment, readiness assurance questions, and at least one application activity. There are not as many complete modules on the website as we'd like. There's a lot of scattered tips, tricks. One of the things that we're doing now in the collaborative is we're actually trying to peer review the modules. We're setting up an editorial board for that. If you're in a medical school, health sciences professions, there is a whole other set of resources for you called MedEd Portal, which has done a fantastic job of collecting and peer reviewing medical-related application activities. We aspire to be as robust as they are. So, yeah, good. All right. One of the things I do want to point out is, so these don't have to be graded. Some of the best TBL instructors don't grade these application activities at all. This is what we mean by group work in team-based learning. So in team-based learning, application activities are not group projects. So this is like, I put that on the paper. If you carry one thing away from today, this is what I want you to carry away. That writing papers and making presentations are fantastic learning experiences for individuals. They are horrible learning experiences for groups because What they require is the production of a complex product. And when a group of people is tasked with producing a complex product, the rational response is to chop that task up into pieces, farm them out to the participants. They each then have a, by definition, uneven learning experience about different content. And then all of that has to be united on one pair of more likely than not resentful hands who has to type it up and make it look like something or be the leader who presents it or something like that. And a lot of the conversation and work and effort and intellectual horsepower goes into, well, should the PowerPoint be blue or red? You know, that kind of thing. The better, and it's just about the structure of the task. And, you know, well-intentioned, I did that for years. I mean, that's just what we had to work with. It was the ideas that were suggested to us by our mentors. The better task structure, the model, the perfect model for a good group work experience is a courtroom jury, where you load the group down with complex information, some of it conflicting maybe, some of it ambiguous maybe, and you force them to produce a decision and maybe a rationale, a short rationale. That's a much better, that's the group projects, the papers, the presentations, those are divergent tasks. The structure of that task is divergent. But when you're forcing, you load a group down with complex information, you force them to produce a decision and maybe short rationale. That's a convergent task. They have to come together and rub their ideas up against each other. And then most of the intellectual effort is weighing the merits of this evidence versus that, of examining the contours of this concept versus that, trying to decide what the very, very best outcome is. So that's why in the third pillar of team-based learning application activities, we talk about them being 4S activities. So they have to force students, they have to be a significant problem. So and we're gonna spend the entire afternoon working on these things. But in brief, they have to be significant problems, so they have to actually come from the field. They have to show how a concept can be made useful, can be put to use. So they have to be a significant problem. They have to force students to make a specific choice. What is the highest? What is the best? What is the, should the company buy, lease, or rent the truck? Actually, the famous, lovely, sort of prototypical model of a 4S activity was in Larry's class. He taught a unit on demographics and local economies. And so they did the readiness assurance, and he did a clarifying lecture. And then on application day, every team had 30 minutes and a thumbtack. And at the end of that 30 minutes, they had to go up to a map of Norman, Oklahoma, and put a thumbtack in the map where is the very best place to open a small dry cleaning business. And then they had to write a half-page rationale and turn that in. And so that was a specific choice. It wasn't, well, and they all had the same problem. That's the third S, is they all had the same problem. So we talk about the reading and what we know about the town, and at the end of that 30 minutes, as a delegate from each team approaches that map with a thumbtack, everyone's, where are they going? You thought about Airport and 45th. We thought about Airport and 45th, but I know there's construction going on right now, blah, blah, blah. If it's the same problem, the teams care about what the other teams thought. If you had to do a dry cleaning business, and you had to do a restaurant, and you had to do a video store, you wouldn't really care where another team put the thumbtack. It would be trivial. You would be Facebooking while they put their thumbtack in the map. And that's the fourth thing, is this has to be a significant problem, forcing students to make a specific choice. They have to all address the same problem, and if possible, having them report simultaneously. Everyone put the thumbtack in the map at the same time. Everybody raised the card at the same time. Everybody have their results displayed at the same time, because it's only when groups report simultaneously that you're able to see differences across the teams. Let's say this was an application activity where there was a right answer, and let's say the right answer was D, and let's say we reported sequentially. Well, we put A, 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 we put A. What if the last group actually had D, but there was 16 groups that came before them that said A? Yeah, we said A.
But we are mature enough to put up with that.
Well, you're something enough. You're something enough. But our undergraduates, maybe not so much. So the simultaneous, yes ma'am, go ahead.
Still overcome that by using a clicker, right?
Aha, right. So using the clicker actually is simultaneous reporting, but there is not accountability by group. So I, as the instructor, have no idea who said, I mean, I can look, right, on here and see if I can track the clicker number to the group and that kind of thing. But that fellow in business who teaches 345 students, he loved clickers and he's giving up on clickers. He's doing this because he actually has started doing this semester. Because if he has his team's report with clickers, you see the bar graph and he can talk a little bit about that. But if he has the teams hold these up, he can see like, there's a puddle of discord. I'm going to wade down into that puddle of discord. Like you said A, you said B, you said C. He's got the one microphone. So I'm going to wade down into this multicolored zone of the classroom. And I know you said A because I can see your card. But with clickers, I can't. And so can you explain to this group why you said A and not B? And that's the job of the instructor at this point, is pretty much to just pick fights between the teams. Right? I mean, in a playful, instructive way. Can you explain your rationale? Yeah, but there's a lot of difference in this class. Maybe major is the right thing to do. What do you think about that? Yeah.
With math, things you can have an absolute right answer. But if you have a sociological question, and you as the instructor think D is the right answer, but 10 groups said it was A and 1 said it was D, are you so sure you're right?
What do sociologists think about that?
According to what the question is.
But I mean, shouldn't it,
But it's
there's
a
a lot of
relation.
ramifications to that.
It's it's based upon what the question was to begin with, and the knowledge of the instructor on what
Well,
the
we
answers
know
are.
that, but the thing is, in that setting, what should the instructor start thinking?
So, I mean, that's a question that cuts right to the heart. Oh, she's got to go. Not even going to hear the answer to the question.
So
That's
sorry.
all right.
I'm being pulled out.
That's all right.
1,000 fires. I love this class, and
Yeah.
I could stay, but it looks like I've got to go.
I'll answer your question, and and your team can catch you up if you got to go. If you got to go, okay. So the question cuts basically right to the heart of what makes team-based learning different from delivery model instruction, and it's what we count as knowledge, right? So what we count as knowledge in a delivery model pedagogy is what the teacher says it is, right? I am the ultimate authority. Team-based learning considers the fact that all of human knowledge is really the best we could do at understanding the world. There's this fantastic demotivational poster, those joke posters that are like motivational posters, but they're not. And it's some beakers in a chemistry lab, and it says teaching. And underneath it, let's see if I can remember this exactly. It says, it's about all the students we failed for not learning the things we have since come to understand weren't true. Right? So what human knowledge is the best we could do at understanding the world. Even math, even science. There are more and less rigorous confidence boundaries around certain conclusions. But what I love about team-based learning is it models teaching and learning as an ongoing conversation. You think you can make an argument for your answer on the readiness assurance test? Write an appeal. Let's talk about it. And if I'm not going to grant it, I'll tell you why, and I'll contribute my understanding of the community of practice to that conversation. But this often arises, like if I'm doing this workshop in a group that's all mathematicians, often I'll hear them say, well, I can see how you could do this in a context that doesn't have right answers, but in math we have right answers, so how do you deal with that? And if I'm doing this in a context full of anthropologists, sociologists, or English literature folks, they'll say, well, I could see how this would work in a context that does have right answers, but it won't work in my discipline. So it's the conversation that knowledge is, that team-based learning structures and sequences learning conversations around? I'm sorry she wasn't here to hear that answer, but.
She'll get it on tape.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, yeah. And so that very question, there's a version of that question that was at the heart of a conversation between two chapters in this book between English teachers. There's two chapters in this book by English teachers in different settings. In one of the chapters, I shouldn't say this on tape, but in one of they have different relationships to multiple choice tests, right? One of them just said, I'm an English teacher, I teach literature, I can't teach with multiple choice tests. That just doesn't, I don't agree with that pedagogy. The other chapter said, we hated multiple choice tests at first, but we came to understand the purpose of them was only to stimulate these critical discussions. They're just the springboard. They're not the answer. And so that's how people who teach in disciplines that are less foundational, that are more interpretive, can find peace with this pedagogy, is that you can do application activities that don't have right answers. Ruth Levine, who is the past president of the Team-Based Learning Collaborative, is a psychiatrist. She doesn't grade her application activities at all. Her purpose of having her students do those is to embrace the grayness, right, of the human psyche and trying to treat people and that kind of thing, and understanding where the contours of that grayness are in certain situations. All right, I've been talking a lot. I want you to actually do question number 2 on the back there, because it gets back to the nuts and bolts. We've been talking about educational theory. So question number 2. Okay. I am going to count to 3, and I'm going to ask you to hold up your cards on number 3, and then I'm going to call on the group whose card goes up last. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. D, D, B, B. Okay, very interesting, very interesting. We had D's and we had B's. So let's hear from this group back here. Why B for you guys?
We talked about D a little.
Okay.
That was one of our, we like the idea of giving students some sense of choice and to make some decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But this whole last part of representatives and coming to consensus seemed a little bit time-consuming, so we went with B.
Okay, good. All right. Ma'am?
We went with D, partly based on my experience with doing this.
Aha.
And so I had read the team-based learning book where they talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 65 students and I had 8 teams, I believe, no, 9 teams. And so there were 9 representatives at the front of the room, and I gave them ranges of where each part had to fall in.
Mm-hmm.
And then they negotiated. And yes, it took time. I had a 2-hour and 45-minute long class, and it took the first day's class between all the orientation. It was the last part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they went up there, and it was, it was smoking. Because they were determined, and they kept recalling their representatives back to the team and telling them, no, we want this. And then they went back, but at the end, they all agreed that this was the syllabus, and they had ownership of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I influenced everybody else to vote D.
Ah.
Quick question with that.
Yes.
How much did they push for more of a grade basis on the group aspect?
It was very interesting. It was very controversial because there were the doubters, because most of them came to the class with a bad experience of group work.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a group that didn't want the group work to count a lot, and then there was the group that wanted it to count more because they knew there was a final exam. They knew that, there were these other things that were individual based. So that's where it went back and forth. If I had to say where I made the mistake is I made the peer part of it too great a number, and I ran into trouble at the end. And if we talk about peer
We will.
evaluation,
Mm-hmm.
I can talk about that.
Yeah, this is sort of a segue into that. Go ahead.
We also got into a little discussion about class size,
Mm-hmm.
about what works for smaller classes
Mhm.
is not going to work for larger classes most probably.
Mm-hmm.
For example, my class, if we decide to do what she did, there would be 30 people in the front trying to decide the grade.
Mhm.
That's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that also plays into it,
Mhm.
with what kind of grading would work.
Yeah, I think that's an important consideration. Did you want to? No? So I will say that each of these is done by respected members of the TBL community. There, again, no right answer. This is what fits you best. I am well, actually, I'm a C kind of guy now. I don't know about the 80-20 thing.
Intellectually very, very strong.
What's that?
Intellectually very strong. We fail to understand C.
Oh, yeah, C's complicated. So let me explain it to you, but there's a beautiful genius to it. There's a beautiful genius to it. So the idea behind C is if I'm a student in your class, and let's say the readiness assurance test is worth 15 points. Let's say I come in and I get 12 out of 15. So that's my individual score. I talk in my team, and because we're a good team, we are one among the many teams that get 15 out of 15. So that generates 2 extra credit bonus points that adds to my individual score. So I come away from that with 14 out of 15. That's how that works. And all the teams that may be tied for second place, members of those teams got 1 point added to their individual score. What's cool about that, it takes some practice. I always recommend giving your students a practice readiness assurance process in the first week of class over the syllabus. It's not worth any points, but it forces them to at least pay some attention to the syllabus, and it gives them practice in the rhythm of this kind of weird instructional activity, so that when it comes time to them actually doing it for their grade, they don't have to be making sense of that part of it. So what I like about C is if it's 2 bonus points added to like 15, a possible 15 or a possible 20, your group can't hurt you. It can only help you, but it also can't save you. So if there's 15 or 20 points, and let's say you're the rock star on a team full of losers, which is of course what all the students are going to expect. Okay, so let's say you blow the top off as an individual. You get 15 out of 15. Awesome. And let's say your team doesn't get any bonus points, which is sort of your fault. If you knew the material that well, you should have done a better job of convincing your team. But whatever, let's say they weren't listening to you the first time out. You still walk away with 15 out of 15. You still walk away with your perfect score. So your team can't hurt you. But let's reverse the roles. Let's say you're the only loser on a team full of rock stars, and you get 2 out of 15 or 2 out of 20. And let's say your team blows the lid off and gets those 2 extra bonus points. So you get 4 out of 20 or 4 out of 15. That's still an F. So your team can't save you either. It can't hurt you, but it can't save you. And I tell you, on the first day of class, when you tell students, we're doing this thing called team-based learning, and they'll go, ah! Wait. 1, all the group work is going to be done in class, no out-of-class group work. And 2, your team can't hurt you. It can only help you. Oh, suddenly, like, they're listening. So it is a little complicated to explain it to them, but it's got this kind of magic to it that it can inoculate them against reacting to the idea of working in groups in general. And it's not that complicated, because in Blackboard or Moodle or whatever you use, you just have 1 column for their individual score, and then 1 column for bonus points. And you put 1 in there, 2 in there, whatever. You don't have to do a lot of hinky jiggling with it. Larry likes D. Larry Michelson, he does D, where he does have students come down. He feels strongly that students having that experience, it not only gives them some buy-in, like this class, like their voice is now in the grading system of the class, but it also demonstrates them from the very first day, this is a really different class than you're used to. It kind of unlocks them from a lot of other expectations they might have had. So, sir, did you?
It seems like there's a step missing, and that is how does the instructor put a grade on group work? Mm-hmm. That you haven't explained it yet.
Yeah, so I didn't, and we can talk about that in the afternoon too. When a student walks out of the end of a team-based learning class, end of the semester, their grade's going to come from 3 sources of points. Everything they do is individual, so that could be the individual readiness assurance test. Maybe you have them write individual papers, they have an individual midterm, final, everything they do is individuals. Everything they do is a group, which is the group, however you manage the group test scoring. And if you have graded application activities, then that grade as well. There's rubrics and things like that we'll talk about this afternoon. And then this peer evaluation process, which we haven't talked about, and it's the fourth principle of 4 of team-based learning. So I'm going to kind of defer your question to this afternoon a little bit. But I did want to draw your attention to this example peer evaluation form. It's in the folder. There's one for everybody. There should be. And this is just an example. You don't necessarily have to use this one for sure. Peer evaluation is, I would argue, the most context-sensitive part of team-based learning. How you decide to do it should depend greatly upon the kinds of students you teach, the culture of the discipline, the culture of the department, what you're comfortable with, the size of the class, all of that stuff. It's up to you. There is a continuum in terms of points, and in terms of how you treat students. So on one end of the continuum, you've got people who, like a fellow at UT, what he will do is he'll say, look, I'm not going to have you assign points to one another, but I will have you give each other appreciations and requests, like on this sheet. One thing about each team member you appreciate, one thing you request. And I'll tell you what, he tells them this on the first day of the semester. At the end of every semester, there's a line of students outside my office door who are right on the cusp between a B+ and an A-, or a B- and a B. And they come to me asking, is there anything I can do for extra credit at that point to get that bump? And he says, well, at this point, no. But I will look at your peer evaluation scores. And if what your teammates, or not scores, your comments, your peer evaluation comments, he doesn't have them use points. If the comments were, great work, you came prepared, you let other people talk, you contributed your share, if that was all the way across the semester, then I will consider giving you that bump. But if your peer evaluation comments were, please come more prepared, please let other people talk, that kind of thing, then no, I won't give you that bump. And what's really crafty about that is, of course, no student knows all semester long whether they're going to wind up on that cusp or not. So it stays a motivating factor. Now, you got to be willing, like this guy's got the cojones to just say, I'm giving you the bump because I'm giving you the bump, or I'm not giving you the bump because I'm not giving you the bump, and that's what I feel is right. Sir?
So you don't have to elucidate this stuff on the syllabus, about like, oh, in terms of grading and whatnot, of what you say right now, that this could be done, this could be a criteria for grading and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, he does have it on a syllabus. You could, whatever.
Right.
So he.
Should, because otherwise the students who wouldn't otherwise, have it in them to come and ask you for that bump.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, he needs to go through and bump everybody.
Or I mean, if you have it on the syllabus and they can say, I want to go get a bump, and then, oh, this is what he's going to use. Like, no, I'm not going to bother. Right? Yeah.
You know about the bump possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have a questionnaire like this. Do you recommend just using it at the end of the syllabus or throughout? Because
Right.
students are going to fake it.
At least once in the middle, as well as at the end. Not just at the end, not just summative. There's got to be some formative feedback that students get so they have a chance to actually benefit from the feedback their classmates give each other.
When you've got the criteria at the top, there's going to be students who quite visibly don't care what other people think.
Right.
But they're going to sit in their group and go, oh, John, what do you think?
Mm.
So anyone in the group thinks, oh, who cares?
Yeah,
So
but what's
students-
interesting.
Students are smart, they fake things. So
Sure. But they can't fake, like, having read the material.
No, right.
Like-
But
like
there's other components they can.
Well, if they don't come prepared, if the group's trying to come to a consensus on their team answer, and this guy repeatedly like, well, I put B, but I got it wrong. Well, why did you put B? Because I read that one thing. What one thing? It's going to be clear. Yeah.
I was just wondering,
Yeah.
advice is-
Let me finish this continuum, and then I want to engage what you have to say. So you've got this guy who actually has no points crossing hands between students. It's all qualitative. Then you have people like this that's got qualitative stuff and points crossing hands, but not requiring, so there's 25 points, and if there's 5 other teammates, more than likely everyone's going to give everybody 5 points, right? Because students do that. Unless there is a real dead weight, and they will weigh in on that. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with students mostly giving each other the same score because I believe the fact that they know this is coming acts as a strong deterrent. If you leave the lights on all the time, roaches tend not to come out as much. And so knowing that this is coming is a motivator for students often to be on better behavior, and I'm okay with that. Some people, they feel like if there's not enough variance, it's a useless measure, so they'll take the next step down and they'll say, well, if there's 5 points on average between your teammates, you have to give at least one person at least a 6, and you have to give one person at most a 4. So you have to differentiate at least 2 people from the average. And then at the very end, you have people who say you can't give any 2 people the same score. So that's like the range of how assertive you want to be at having students differentiate each other. And I mean, like I said, this is contextually sensitive. I worked with a teacher in economics, he was in economics. He taught at a large, just about open enrollment university in a very, very, very like liberal town. And the students hated peer evaluation because they felt it was the man trying to drive a wedge between the people. Okay? He then went to a different, small, very competitive university, taught the same class, and they loved peer evaluation because they felt like it was a chance for them to hold each other accountable. So it's cultural. Okay, there's a couple of questions. Ma'am, yeah.
First?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. My experience was that I used the peer evaluation, it was only a 7-week semester.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really hard to have 2 peer evaluations in there.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened is that what in your liberal town happened, the students thought it was vastly unfair that they should have to rank each other, so they just gave each other equal scores, and then the ones that I knew that should have gotten a 4 grade, the higher grade, because the peer evaluation percentage was too high.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a learning experience for me, and I came away very frustrated.
Yeah.
Because I knew there were students who didn't deserve that B,
Mm-hmm.
but they got it.
Larry will try to inoculate against that by saying when he's introducing this, so it can be tempting to be nice and give everybody the same scores. But remember, if you do that, you're helping the people who contributed the least and you're hurting the people who contributed the most. Just remember, yeah, that's what he says.
You could also tell them you're hurting your own grade. That usually works.
You're hurting your own grade? How are you hurting your own grade if you give everybody the same?
Well, if your peer evaluation points are going to count,
Uh-huh.
so if somebody did very well and everybody gives them a 5 or a 6 or whatever.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand, maybe there's somebody who did not come prepared at all,
Right.
and they also got the same score, it would hurt them in the end, right? If it was points going in towards the final grade is what I mean.
I guess I don't understand how if I give everybody the same and I have somebody who's strong and somebody who's weak, if I give them the same score,
Well, if everybody else does the same thing.
then if you contributed, then you will suffer from that sort of cultural effect. Yeah, that's true.
I just wanted to address the concern the students proposed, the criteria for peer evaluation and fake, basically functional group behavior. I'm not saying, I agree that students are smart enough to do that, but also suggest that students are mostly smart enough to recognize when that's happening. So if there's a group member who asks me what I think, but every time I start to answer and 2 words in, they interrupt me, I'm gonna notice that's happening. So I would say that's somewhat canceled by them noticing those tricks amongst each other.
By the same token, I don't know if there's any psychologists in here, but faking it may lead to actually getting positive feedback, which may lead to learning and doing better things in the future. So maybe it's good that they fake it.
Maybe. So I know we have to be out of here at 11:30, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're ready to make the transition when you are because they're ready for us for lunch.
But is someone going to be like looming, waiting to use the room? Oh, at 12.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in this space, yes.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay, fantastic. So we can loosen up a little bit more. I was like, so other thoughts about peer evaluation, peer comments, the grading system, that kind of thing. How might this work or not work in your class?
Can I ask a question not about
Sure.
your evaluation?
Yeah.
I was thinking about the kind of group/team dynamics that you were talking about in stages that we know.
Mhm.
Do you find that in this with this pedagogy you go through kind of storming and norming in the same way? And if so, how do you address that?
So I have found that the scratch-off cards, before we even say that, the incentive systems and the task structures are such that students are expected to and motivated to very quickly start seeing each other as resources. And the immediate feedback of the scratch-off cards like helps them tune into the quality of those perceptions. So when someone doesn't know what they're talking about, regardless of how social they may be, like they're continually having it revealed sort of publicly that they don't know what they're talking about, so they self-regulate more. So I haven't found the storming, norming, performing. I've found that there's some nervous laughter, they do a practice rap, then it gets real when they do a real one, and after just one of those, they're on high fives and laughter and that kind of thing. So I haven't seen a systemically generated conflict phase like this literature suggests in group dynamics. Now, that being said, sometimes there is group conflict. I mean, that happens very infrequently, considering how like contentious human beings can be in team-based learning. It does happen sometimes. And sometimes the more competitive students may come up to you at the end of the first day when you describe this, and they'll try to wedge in there, and they'll say something like, so, you know, I'm going to give it my best and everything, but, you know, sometimes groups just don't work out. And if my team just turns against me for some reason, you're going to kind of mediate that, right? You're going to make sure that doesn't hurt my grade. And at the very first day of class, the answer that we recommend is, well, actually, no. There's only one person in this world who's completely responsible for your relationship with others, and that's you. And so that kind of puts them on notice that you gotta go all in on this. Larry, in his, God, now 30, almost 40 years of teaching with this, mid-30s, I think he's actually pulled people out of groups or reorganized groups 2 or 3 times. Yeah. Yeah.
So when we say that grading, and then it's about the full course, like if we are giving a full course in the team-based format.
Mm-hmm.
If we are just experimenting and we're giving few hours of the team-based,
Mm-hmm.
do we have to grade those few hours, or just make it as a learning or teaching experience, and the exams goes as a regular exam goes at the end of the day?
So this is one of those questions that is like up to you. What would work best in your world? What would you be most comfortable? A lot of people, the very lucky people, get a semester of time bought out to retool their whole course, and that's awesome. Most of us don't have that luxury. So what we have to do is kind of blur into it, maybe trying a couple 4S application activities, maybe trying a couple team-based learning readiness assurance processes. A great way to actually experiment with the individual test, team test, scratch-off effect, a fantastic, safe way to experiment with that is test prep. So the nursing school at UT is having great success with this. They have test prep sessions right before the high-stakes individual exams, like the midterms. There's 3 or 4 of them across a semester. So the day before, they'll do basically a readiness assurance process, individual test, team test, feedback, appeals, all of that. But it's to prepare them for the midterm. So they are bought in, like they really want to do well. But it's not necessarily graded, it's just getting them ready for the graded thing. So that's a safe way to tinker with those. And then maybe you design 1 or 2 application activities, and maybe you don't grade that right away. Yeah, good question. Ma'am, and then you had a question too, but.
Have you ever seen a case where students are actually demotivated because they consistently don't do well? Because we frequently have cases where students don't understand the material.
Mm.
Sometimes it's because they don't have the time, because we're a commuter school.
Mm-hmm.
They have to support family, they're working 2 jobs,
Mm-hmm.
they don't understand the material.
Right.
Chemistry.
So I mean, that question reveals the reliance of team-based learning on the preparation materials.
Right.
Like, we are expecting that the materials that we give them are realistic for the students to actually get a handle on, at least somewhat on their own, before us being ready to translate for them. So that's addressed in a couple of ways. Some people do the reading guide thing, like a statistics class. Good Lord, reading a statistics textbook? Ugh! Punch myself in the eye is more fun to me. And so the statistics teacher I work with has developed reading guides. Like, here's the concepts I want you to be sure to understand or recognize when you see them, especially these 4 things on these 5 pages, that kind of thing. That at least helps focus the student's attention. So that's one way people handle it. Another way people handle it is they will do, like now it's really easy to just do a voiceover PowerPoint presentation. So you just set recording on your computer, you go through the PowerPoint and like give the little mini lecture, a little mini lecture that you might give normally, put that up on the Blackboard, LMS, whatever, ahead of time, so students can like hear your voice and start feeling that connection. Now a third thing that one of the best chapters in that book, this fellow recommends, very contentious, not contentious, but it's challenging something that needs to be challenged, I feel, in the team-based learning community, which is, or it's not challenging, it's exploring that introduction to the content experience. This fellow teaches the history of Buddhism. So he's teaching students using concepts that are just alien to them, using a language that's just weird to them, right? So, I mean, he doesn't speak that language, but these concepts are named in Hindu or Urdu words. And so he has found he likes to give one day, just one day, of what he calls mapping the territory. He says, okay, you're going to read the stuff before next class, and here's like the big chunks of it. I'm mapping the territory. You're going to have to read more to acquire more of the detail. So then he does that before the readiness assurance process. So it's an open question about, and it's again one of those questions that you answer as well as you can for yourself, for your students, about how easy or more difficult you make the readiness assurance questions, what kind of materials you give them ahead of time to try and get them to learn the material. It's a tough one, yeah. Ma'am, you've had a question for a while.
It's a side comment about the C grading system for the weighting that you do for the TRAC. Have you had the experience of having a really hugely dominant group and then a really poor group, and there ends up sort of being demotivating after time because there's such a bimodal distribution in terms of how many points they can get from the team?
I haven't seen a bimodal distribution among groups so much. I mean, you will get a stronger team. You will sometimes get a generally weaker team. That's the danger of putting those scores up publicly like I did. I like doing that because it's not competition, but it feels like it. And it's FERPA compliant because they're not any individual scores. They're collaboratively generated scores. But it can actually give a goose to a group like after the first time to, oh, wow, we don't want to have that happen again, do we? But if it keeps happening, I might stop putting up public scores just because I don't want to like continually ram that down their throats. I do see a bimodal distribution more frequently on individual grades. People buy in or they just check out. Now, I don't know if those folks in the medical disciplines here are familiar with that article that came out last year in Academic Medicine. Paul Colas and friends looked at 178 pathology students over 2 years, and they analyzed their end of the semester test scores and compared how well they did on material that they were taught using team-based learning and how well they did on material that was taught in other ways. And they found that everybody did better, but the weaker students were helped the most. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Has that been replicated in other disciplines in any way, that it tends to be particularly good for the moderately weak students, if you will?
I don't know off the top of my head. It feels right to me, but I don't know. I can't like name an article. Yeah. Ma'am, and then sir?
In the teams experience that I had one team with a second language learner. And the rest of the team members just pounded on the student because she wouldn't communicate in class. And it turned out she was a second language learner. And she simply just, by the time she could marshal her thoughts and translate it mentally and speak it, the rest of them were all over her. And so I was wondering what your experience in a similar situation would suggest, how to handle that.
Well, I mean, that's certainly not a problem that's unique to the team-based learning world, right? Like, that's probably a challenge that student is facing throughout their day in an English-speaking school. The one accommodation that I've seen, I mean, what I might consider would be the accommodation that we wind up recommending for folks who need extra time testing is have them come to your office or a TA's cubicle or something 15 minutes before class starts so they get a head start on the individual test. They come to class, they then pick up and keep doing the individual test, they turn it in, so they'll at least have had some more time to think about how to talk about the material, but in the moment, I don't think there's anything special about team-based learning that would make it easier or more difficult for them to just engage conversation like they would in a normal class. That's just tough. That's tough. Sir?
In this peer evaluation, I've tried it in various ways, and it seems like there's a difference, and I'm just learning that it's a matter of the time frame. So if you give it to them, say, well, how has the group worked, you know? Like right now, the form, there's no time sequence here. And so I found that if you do an evaluation at the end and you don't specify, well, this is talking about the whole semester, or no, this is just talking about the most recent time, because some students will just lay back the whole time and not do anything. And then right at the end, they'll volunteer for the most critical thing that needs to be done and then help the group do it. But yet they really didn't contribute the whole time. And so how do you get over this time evaluation?
So that's one of the many reasons why I recommend doing it several times across the semester. You can specify over the last 2 weeks or something like that. I've not heard the time specificity being crucial. It's new to me. So I guess what I would recommend is certainly doing it at least once in the middle of the semester. Maybe, like I do it a third of the way through, 2/3 of the way through, and again at the end. Some people could do it at the end of each major unit or something.
So when you do it at the end, is it for the whole time, or is it since the previous peer group review?
You know, I haven't specified, but maybe I should. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's a very good question. I'll think about that. So I like to wrap up by showing, it's all well and good to talk about this. Some of you have seen how this works in classes. Some of you have not. So I like to wrap up by showing this video of how this works at a handful of classes at UT. And because team-based learning has made the most inroads in sciences and the health sciences especially, I specifically targeted teachers who were not. And that's actually why my book is Team-Based Learning in the Social Sciences and Humanities, because I'm trying to push the frontier. So those of you who are in the sciences and health sciences and don't see your people here, it's because your people are fine compared to these other populations. So. Even in large classes, team-based learning motivates students to high levels of attendance, preparation, participation, and critical thinking. But team-based learning is not any form of active learning or group work. In team-based learning, students engage course content at an applied level, motivated by both task design and incentive structures to spend time on task, gathering input from all their teammates. 4 practical elements of team-based learning prepare and motivate students for this high level of engagement. The first is strategically formed permanent teams. Decide what student characteristics would make it easier or more difficult for a student to do well in your class, and ensure that these characteristics are spread as fairly as possible across teams.
So how can we create a team that's going to be balanced in terms of the characteristics of the students in the class, by having all the students at the beginning of the semester take a survey and basically answer a set of questions that would then help us to kind of group them. And so we built up a spreadsheet of teams that we could then assign the students to. So when we come to class, up on the big DocuCam, I have kind of a seating arrangement set up of the entire classroom and where your team is supposed to be sitting.
The way that I constructed them was to make them as diverse as possible. These teams are 6-7 members each, and these teams are permanent. So they don't shift. This is who you belong to, and you sink or swim, and I'm hoping swim together.
Our group was really diverse. We had 3 seniors, 2 freshmen, everyone with a different major. No one knew each other going into it. When you come together, it was pretty interesting to see all become like friends at the end of it.
The second element of team-based learning is a sequence of activities that takes place at the beginning of each unit of the course. This sequence is called the readiness assurance process because it assures that students are ready to move forward into high-level application of the material. Having completed assigned readings, students first take an individual test over them. Then they take the exact same test again as a team, coming to consensus on their team answers. They get immediate feedback on their team tests, after which they can write appeals if they figure they can make a case for their answers which were marked as incorrect.
To guide them, I've created a reading guide with some general questions and then some specific terms that I want them to look for. Having read the books and looked over the guide and reasonably comfortable, at least that they've read the information, they come into class the first day and they take a quiz, 20 points, multiple choice. Then, after they've done that, I put them in the groups. Each team retakes the same quiz. And they have a scratch-off.
I distribute these scratch cards, and the students, then I break the students into their groups, and they go through the questions as a group, and they decide what the answer should be, and then they scratch off what they think the answer should be. And if the answer is correct, then they see a little asterisk.
I'm not scratching until I get approval from everyone.
Okay, number 4, we said A.
Come on in.
That's wrong. So now we're going with D.
With the scratch-off thing, I actually like the way that worked because you had to keep going until you got it right. And so you couldn't just like miss it and say, oh, forget it, we didn't get it. You know, you kind of had to, okay, well, if this isn't the case, now what?
When I walk around, it is just astounding to hear these students arguing over fine points of Texas civil procedure. They point out to each other, well, this is what this rule says. Well, this comment in this rule says something else, and how do you put those together?
And I've never heard anyone say, you know, I told you it was B, and you overrode what I said, or it's kind of remarkable in that way. I found it seems very collaborative and not competitive.
You know, there's one guy who was really smart in our group. You know, there's one question where we all had like the same answer, and he had one different one. And you know, I think we went through like almost every answer except his, and at the end he was right. And you know, it's just because he didn't speak up. Next time it got around, he made sure he's like, listen, I remember this. You know, this happened because of this. I'm pretty sure this is right. Or like, I think we owe you one. So you know, we trusted him. It was right. And that was the best part about it. So just kind of involving everyone.
At the end of the readiness assurance process, if teams feel they can argue in support of any of their answers which were marked incorrect, they can generate written appeals, which must consist of a clear statement of argument, supported by specific evidence from the readings.
If I wrote a question that's poorly worded, if it's ambiguous, they can rewrite it. Or if I just put the wrong answer, they can go into their book, write out this is the correct answer on this page, and they have to cite the evidence.
They seem to work well together, and again, it's a real team spirit building exercise.
The readiness assurance process is followed by a clarifying lecture in which the teacher can focus specifically upon what the team scores indicate the students have not yet grasped. The third element of team-based learning consists of application activities in which students must make decisions to solve discipline-based problems, often using case studies, realistic data, or other specific examples of materials from your field. These activities work best when they incorporate 4 elements that all begin with the letter S. First, problems must be significant in the sense of demonstrating a concept's usefulness. Second, groups should be required to use course concepts to make a specific choice. For example, which procedure is best to implement in a given situation and why? Or from a certain article, what is the best piece of evidence in support of an argument and why? Third, all teams should work on the same problem, case, or question, so they will care about decisions other groups made and their rationales. Fourth, if possible, groups should report choices simultaneously, so differences in group conclusions can be explored immediately.
This semester I taught one class with 345 students in it. Oftentimes with cases, you know, there's not necessarily a right answer or wrong answer. It's, you know, how is it that you reached the particular decision that you reached? What were the steps that you went through in order to reach the conclusion that you reached? So I use the iClicker technology to be able to kind of gauge where the students are at any given time in terms of what they're thinking about the case.
There's emphasis on you have to learn a certain number of facts, but more I'm interested in them learning the process of thinking through history, how to think like a historian does. The way I've done this is to create a kind of a large sheet, an 11 by 17 sheet, that has kind of steps that one needs to go through to think about this answer. Each of these documents basically is steps to writing a good essay. So I had agree or disagree, Cold War fears were justified, and taking this from the historian's viewpoint. And so agree, disagree, write a very short explanation. So the idea is to take them down sort of sequentially through a series of thought.
It's about the New Deal. And it was, if you had to summarize it in one sentence, and we had one sentence here, pick which one you thought was more accurate. And then you take that one and compare it to another sentence, which one's more accurate, and then take the winner of that one, like a tournament kind of. And so you end up with the one sentence you like the best at the end. And we found that one was kind of hard, just because like, you want to take part of this sentence and part of this sentence and part of this sentence and kind of put it all together in your own thing, which we had to do at the end.
We could say this about them that's negative, we could say this about them that's positive, and then to write some sort of summary statement that tries to give it some more nuanced meaning.
And then we go up, and each one of us, like, we wouldn't go up and present, but we could give our big sheets. She could put it on the projector, and each one of us could, have a different, take on it.
This is a great exercise because they are using the rules to dissect a statement and make an argument one way or the other.
Well, my reasoning is that once the court makes a new judgment, so like once that motion is filed, it's possible to go 90 days.
It's wonderful lawyering technique. The way I've always taught it before team-based learning was stand-up lecture. Students are half asleep. I couldn't tell if they were good lawyers or not because they sat there and didn't talk very much. So I'm impressed with my class. I now know my class are good lawyers.
A group becomes a team when members not only feel accountable to an outside authority, but also feel accountable to one another. Therefore, the last element of team-based learning is student-to-student teammate feedback. Halfway through the term, and again at the end, students are required to give one another brief pieces of group participation feedback. In many cases, this takes the form of students expressing for each teammate one thing they appreciate and one thing they request. These are given to the teacher or TA, who then processes them and emails each student a compilation of what their teammates appreciate about and request from them as teammates.
Lots of them said, what I request of you is keep up the good work. So that, that's nice in itself. Others of them, they said things like, you have such good ideas. I wish you'd come to class more. One student, I remember, people said, you contribute so much to this group, but you have a negative attitude. And every single person on the team said, but you have a negative attitude. These are things I can't tell students. I can't walk up to a student and say, clean up that attitude. And it just doesn't work.
The professorial role is an extension of the parental role in a way, and I think it tends to incite a kind of rebelliousness, or can't help but do that. And it seems to me that when another student tells another student, you need to come to class more, it's more of on a friendly basis, I think, more like a brother, or if you want to use the family model, more like a brother or a sister than a parent.
With the four essential elements of strategically formed permanent teams, readiness assurance, well-designed application activities, and peer evaluations in place, you will be ready to encounter more motivated, engaged, collaborative critical thinkers in your classroom than you may have thought possible.
I do know in the past, when I didn't use the team-based learning, students didn't like working in groups, or a lot of them did. They would say, I don't like hearing from my classmates, I want to hear from the professor. And I don't get that feedback anymore, so that's huge.
It forces you to work that hard. It forces you to put in the effort, where every day you're going to be there, every day you're going to be ready, and every day you're going to be prepared, because people rely on you to be prepared to be there.
They're learning more. I'm learning more. I know more about what they understand and what they don't understand.
I had a lecture class last semester, and I had this team-based learning class this semester, and I thought this class was 10 times better than the last one. I felt like I learned more, came to class more, read more, everything. I mean, it's enjoyable. It really made history. I really am not a big fan of history at all, but I really enjoyed this class.
Yay. All right, so that's a wrap for the morning session. Thanks for playing all your great questions. I hope many or most of you are going to join us in the afternoon. And first, let's have some lunch. Yes. Yay, lunch!